And I'm not even gonna lie to y'all. There is someone who straight up came up to me and was like, Denver, I started listening to your podcast because I expected you to talk about sex. You've barely spoken about sex. A lot of what you're talking about nowadays is...
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
Welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man whose sickness for the thickness prevents him from skinny dipping. He is also a man who may include jumping to conclusions to his cardio routine. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. And then you already know what it is that I'm about to talk about. Like, it was already in the title. If you've read the title, you already know. If you haven't checked out the title, because maybe it's part of autoplay or some shit, well, you know, this is that episode. The episode where I speak on unpopular opinions regarding bedroom matters, because apparently, according to some people, I haven't been addressing bedroom matters enough. Because, I don't know, like, I've been fussing over who gets to pay for a date or some shit. But anyways, I've got a bunch of unpopular opinions that I need to put down, and also something that shows a lot more cooperation for men. And the wild part about it is, unlike what a lot of women might actually think, it's not even in regards to making money. Now, we coordinate ourselves and we operate as a team, almost like an organization, when it comes to something completely different. And I'll even give you a hint. We don't even need to know each other all that well for us to get shit done. Like, it's kind of like that, really. But all in all, I do intend on getting into that and a bunch more in the unpopular opinions. So, should you like what it is that you're listening to? Should you not like it? Should you have a different form of feedback? Or should you want to suggest a potential topic and or guest for the podcast? Then the DMs are always open. The social media links are in the description. I don't want to say below, so wherever it is that your description is. And should you feel a little bit lazy or you don't feel like checking the description, then, you know, you can always listen till the end because I usually mention them there. But all in all, thank you so much for listening. And, you know, like I said earlier, I hope you do enjoy what it is that you're listening to. But with that said, I need to kick things off, and that requires me to bring up a video of a woman who recently came to the realization that apparently men do things in a very cooperative manner whenever we have a shared goal, which sometimes doesn't even directly involve us as individuals. Because apparently, according to her, bro code is like a walking company. Now, I am going to let the clip play, then give my thoughts on it, because this is one of those situations where she probably noticed something or a guy told her, because the level of detail that she brought up in all of this is very, very interesting. But with all of that said, let me just let the clip play. So without further ado,
when it comes to securing private parts, yes, when it comes to securing private parts, this is where you realize that men are walking companies. Jonte ni parastatal linatembea. Stay with me so that I can explain to you how. Those male friends of his that you think one day can be your boys and your homeboys and you can all be one big, happy circle of friends. Those are his managers. Kuna creative director, head of the Department of Lies. Kuna hadi wardrobe, makeup and housing. Yes, bro, unaweza nisaidia kijako. Sini mimi nakusho. I'm telling you, I'm the expert here. Ukiulizwa nani alikwambia hizi vitu zote, sema uliambiwa na Michelle. And let nobody argue with you. Juu ni mimi nimekushow. I'm a very credible source of information. Yes. Kuna hadi risk management. Kuna hadi risk management. You know? And two of your favorite male friends of his are head of PR and marketing. You think I'm joking? Kwani wingman ni nini?
okay. Now, I find it very interesting that she managed to notice this, because normally women don't notice this when it comes to guys. So either she's part of a group of guys or some dude just gave her a bunch of that information. And I'm not the only person that's made this assumption, because clearly even the men in the comment section are clearly bringing out the fact that someone gave her a little too much information. there's dudes out here busy talking about we have a security breach, we need to regroup and re-strategize, abort mission. Some guys are talking about code red Mayday. Like, the number of guys that are out here busy saying who the hell leaked information. So if anything, it has been proven, at least by the number of guys that are bringing up the fact that this babe definitely got her info from somewhere, that clearly someone's been telling this babe a lot. Like, this isn't something that you normally find a lot of women picking up on, but considering that it's already been put out there, I will just come out and say it. What she is saying is basically quite true. Although the funny thing is, you haven't heard of a head of finance in that entire mix. That's probably one of the funnier bits, and I'll get to why in a second. But all in all, like, most of what she was talking about is true. And the interesting part about it is, as guys, whenever it comes to bagging a babe, and I don't know if this is something that's just natural to us, but we are so supportive of each other, not unless if someone is actively competing against you to pick up the same babe, or just doesn't give a shit about you and is just an absolute asshole. Like, guys are so willing to help each other in bagging a babe that a dude can be a wingman out of the blues before you even ask for it, before you even say that you need a wingman. Like, guys are out here busy trying to help guys secure bodies here and there, or just generally secure the opposite sex. Mostly because I guess maybe on one side we understand the effort that it takes, and making it easier for someone is always a great thing. Two, you know, if a nigga can win, you know, like, it's a great thing. Like, inherently guys do tend to be particularly positive with each other on these aspects. So not unless if the guy that is next to you either wants the same babe or just doesn't give a shit, more often than not you'll find that guys will help each other. Like, they may not even know each other, they may never have talked before, but a guy can very easily assume the position of wingman just to assist you to bag a babe if he sees that maybe you're struggling, or maybe he sees that you're getting close, you just need a little bit of a nudge. So it is something that does actually happen. Now, there was the whole risk management department, there was the whole head of PR and marketing shit. Like, to be quite honest, a lot of that is basically just all towards roughly about the same thing, either securing the babe or preventing a situation where you have unsecured the babe. Like, the babe was already within your grasp, or you already had the babe, and then suddenly something happens, and now, you know, she no longer wants to be with you or do it with you. Like, that's something that we would probably try to mitigate as much as possible as guy friends. So for those of y'all that might be wondering why it is guys do that, now you know why. And I did mention the fact that there is no finance department. Now, truth of it is, there are very nuanced cases where there may be a finance department, but it is a very finite department and does not last long, because it usually converts itself into something else, or it leaves the group, or it just doesn't spend as much time with the group. What usually does happen is either you have your own internal finance departments as, you know, individuals, or you have your own budgets. I think me saying that, you know, each department should have its own budget probably makes a little bit more sense, because, you know, like, no one wants to start putting a bunch of money just so that someone else can get pussy. Like, there's no way that actually makes sense for other guys. I don't mind helping my friend maybe once or twice here and there, but depending on the amount and how much I'd be expected to spend, there always will be limits whenever it comes to money. But all in all, what she did say is particularly true. It's sad that, you know, some dude decided to overshare, or maybe the friend group of dudes that she's a part of decided to show her the entire game. But, you know, since it's already out there, I might as well elaborate it. But either way, with that said, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our main topic of this episode. And let me just say that this topic was heavily influenced by others. Okay, not really by others, but by feedback that I've gotten. Now, of late, actually for quite a while, I have spoken quite a bit about relationships and love and a bunch of other guy shit. But apparently, you know, people have been noticing that I haven't been speaking about sex as much. And I'm not even gonna lie to y'all, there is someone who straight up came up to me and was like, Denver, I started listening to your podcast because I expected you to talk about sex. You've barely spoken about sex. a lot of what you're talking about nowadays is whether guys should pay for dates or not. Like, come on, bring something spicy back into the mix. Okay, maybe that last bit I've probably stretched it out a little bit, but you get the point. Like, people have noticed that I haven't been speaking about sex as much. Now, I do have a reason for it, and it kind of does fall almost in line with one of the first two unpopular opinions that I have. But considering that people did say that they have been wanting me to talk a little bit more about sex because I haven't spoken about sex lately, I figured I might as well do something about it. So I decided to go and source a couple of unpopular opinions in the topic of sex, and I do have a bunch of them. Now, I have about 6 of them plus a bonus at the end, and I do want to get into them so that I can at least break down some of the thoughts that some of you have in regards to sex, and break down whether I agree with them, disagree with them, feel differently about it, maybe I'm in the middle, and at least elaborate why. Because, why the hell not? But all in all, with that said, I want to get into my unpopular opinions on sex. So I am going to start with the first one, which, oddly enough, this is probably one of the most repeated quote-unquote unpopular opinions that was there, meaning that it wasn't even an unpopular opinion. And the interesting thing is, considering that this is an open comment section where I pulled all of this data from, I'm surprised that the person, or at least the people that were going ahead to comment on this, weren't recognizing the fact that a bunch of people have been talking about how it is actually that particular opinion. But all in all, the long and short of it is that sex is overrated. And I'll read one of the ones that I did see here, which is particularly interesting, which says, and I quote, "For something that's pushed in movies, songs, and in a lot of books, it's really overrated." End quote. Okay, do I agree with this or not? I actually disagree with it. Now, a lot of people are saying, or at least have said, that sex is overrated, which is why, first of all, I don't think it's an unpopular opinion. This is probably about as popular as it gets today, considering the amount of sexual content that people get out here. And the reasoning behind that I will get into in a minute. But in my opinion, and what I would consider to be the unpopular opinion in this case, is actually that sex is actually quite underrated. Now, the reasoning that I give for that is the fact that people have seen a lot of sex content pushed out in a lot of entertainment media and in a lot of art, to a point where they feel like they've gotten overstimulated by it, and there isn't much else that is divulged into it as far as details and so on. It's basically just some element of sex or some teasing of sexual content. So as a result, because they've gotten so overstimulated by that, they feel like it's probably overrated for the fact that it's being pushed so much, yet it's just an act. But for the most part, I would say it's quite underrated because it carries quite a lot of benefits. It is something that involves a certain amount of study whereby there's entire therapists for it, okay? And also, you look at it as a tool for marketing, it is quite impressive, and it's guaranteed a shit ton of results for a lot of people. So for me to say that sex is overrated is something that I personally can't do. So I would say that it's underrated because people are seeing a lot more of it, but I would probably say that it's been overused as a tool for marketing, as a source of entertainment. I feel like it's been overused quite a bit because nowadays, people try to include sex scenes in movies and series, and books that sell mostly to women will have quite a lot of sex scenes. You find that people will try to sell people on sex quite a bit. Now, the whole, most books thing, I wouldn't say that most books have sex. I've read a few self-help books here and there. None of them had a sex scene. But, the point is, it's used a lot as a selling point, but personally, it's not it's bad. I would even argue that it's underrated, but because people have been so overstimulated by it, they would probably say that it's overrated. So all that to say, sex isn't overrated. I disagree with that. I would say that it's more underrated. I feel like that's more of an unpopular opinion. And with that, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our next unpopular opinion of this episode, which is, and I quote, sex isn't as interesting as people make it seem or sound. They're just fixated upon it. Two things most people don't get: sarcasm and orgasm. End quote. Okay, now I would probably argue that, the whole sarcasm and orgasm thing is a very dope line. But that said, I would argue out the orgasm part. The sarcasm, that one I can agree. There's a lot more people nowadays that don't get sarcasm, in my opinion. But that's kind of besides the point and not really relevant to this particular topic. Now, the bit about sex not being as interesting as people make it seem or sound, and it's just a fixation, I actually agree with it. And yes, I know in the previous bit I was talking about how sex isn't overrated, it's actually underrated. But in reality, and this is something that I've noticed, and unfortunately I'll even admit on this episode, it's a pretty big part of the reason why I haven't really dived into sex related topics quite a bit on this podcast. It's the fact that in as much as, yes, the discussion of sex could be very interesting and it's a hot topic for a lot of people and some people still enjoy it, it's not something that you can really make a lot of interesting content off of. Not unless if you now start getting into the more sciencey side of it, which kind of starts to kill a lot of the, can I call it, entertaining appeal of sex? But all in all, it just doesn't carry as much interest past a certain point. Because fine, yes, you can talk about, certain instances when it comes to sex, how to act, how to behave, different gender issues when it comes to sex and so on. But I feel like that gets to a point where it now starts to kind of hit a ceiling and you basically start running around the same box. And yes, you can try to be out of the box with a few things here and there, but for the most part, whenever it comes to discussions around sex and even sex content, you find that it is fairly limited as far as making the entire experience or just making the topic interesting as a whole. So even for me, I got to a point where I was like, okay, it's not a bad topic, but at the same time, if someone is, having my podcast in their car radio and they're dropping their kids off to school, me talking about sex might not be the best idea, Granted, yes, I do always indicate that, my podcast does have explicit topics, but it's not like I would want someone to not listen, because they have kids in the room or something, or they have to use earphones. I looked at it and I was like, okay, as a topic, there's only so much I can talk about, but also besides that, I wouldn't want to alienate people because I dive into very explicit topics like that all the time. So that's actually why I don't talk about sex topics all that much, or at least I don't talk about sex as much or as deeply as I used to initially. So back in the day, if you remember, I used to do this thing called The Talk. I would have topics that were basically all around sex. I did it a bunch, but over time it just kind of started to wear down and kind of wear off. So that's why I haven't spoken about it as much, for those of you all that have been asking why. Now, with that said, I am going to leave that one and move it on to our next unpopular opinion on the topic, which is, and I quote, "Men and women should be virgins till they get married." End quote. And this one's interesting. Do I agree? Do I disagree? Okay, to some degree I can say I agree quite a bit, because the fact that people are having way more sex right now than before. Okay, I'm not gonna say before, because apparently according to statistics we're having less sex as opposed to the earlier stage millennials and the ones in the middle. I would still argue that it's affected a lot of our relationships now as opposed to, let's say, 60, 70, even 100 years ago. Because there's a lot of people now that talk about the idea of sexual compatibility. That wasn't something that people used to talk about back in the day, but it is something that has started to affect people as far as dating decisions are concerned. Also, I would probably argue that maybe it has led to a little bit more infidelity as far as, just people in relationships are concerned, because there's a lot more people that are getting to that point where they're like, what, the partner that I settled down with isn't the best sexual partner I've had. And some of them go and seek out additional sexual partners, or they seek out better sex, if I can put it like that, which ends up affecting the state of the relationship. that's something that has happened quite a bit. It is something that, especially if you go and you look at Maurice Madeka's content, does involve a lot of people that kind of speak on that. Now, they don't necessarily talk about it in the negative light, but they do kind of point out that their partner wasn't giving it to them very well, they missed their ex, and stuff like that. So in retrospect, I look at it and I'm like, you know what, maybe if we didn't start having sex a lot earlier and a bunch of us waited until marriage, maybe we wouldn't know that there's better sex. And I know it sounds like holding back on such a thing is such a bad thing, but think about it. Ignorance is bliss. There's some people, just because they don't know what better sex is supposed to be, makes them more faithful, because the best sex that they've ever known is the sex that they have had with their partner. And it might be substandard, and maybe the partner might not be the best in the bedroom, but at the end of it, that's the best sex they've ever had. And when you think about it, that's kind of a good thing. Now, on the downside of that, of course, sometimes you might end up with someone that just may completely turn you off of the idea of sex and might make you not really like it or want it as much. And in some instances, it can promote infidelity, because it's this thing that's been hyped up so much, but you end up with a partner that either withholds it or just doesn't, give it as much attention as it probably should be given, and kind of treats it like it's this chore that they have to do. Women, I'm talking to you. Some of y'all treat guys so badly whenever it comes to sex, and more so people that you're in a relationship with, and instead of having discussions about it, instead of trying to make things better, y'all would much rather use it as a tool and weaponize it against the guy so that you can get what it is that you want, or express your frustration towards the dude, which I would argue is probably one of the worst things you can do. So I'm kind of for it but against it. But the thing with it is, this is one of those things that, we opened Pandora's box, so the chances that we're going to close it are close to impossible, at least in our time. But with that said, let me move it on to the next unpopular opinion of this episode, which says, and I quote, "Most women have never experienced orgasm," end quote. And this one, I would like to come out and categorically call it out for being bullshit. Now, first of all, this for a very long time wasn't an unpopular opinion. It was quite a popular opinion, and people have spoken about how, 98% of women have never experienced orgasm, 60-something% of women have never experienced orgasm. And I would like to come out and categorically call it out as bullshit, based off of, and I know this should not be categorized as like statistics that relate to real life in direct comparison or anything, but considering the number of women that are hunting for dick out here, and I say this knowing full well that I've had discussions with people online and also physically, it's hard for me to say that most women haven't experienced orgasm. Hell, if anything, I would argue that they've moved that goalpost a little bit further ahead, from just orgasm to something like squirting, or multiple orgasms, or getting a babe off. Because there's a ton of women that will talk about how, most women haven't experienced orgasm, but you listen to them, you listen to their friends, they're talking about how they've been getting great dick. Women out here are hunting. Now, granted, that's also a byproduct of the fact that people have been telling more women that there's nothing wrong with approaching a dude. Go ahead, do it, and your chances of success are probably way better than even most guys. And the truth of it is, in as much as you might hear people saying, most women have never experienced orgasm, on one end, you can say that it's the men's fault, they aren't putting in the right kind of effort, they don't know how to touch her right, they don't know how to talk dirty, blah, blah, blah. But also, it's partially the women's fault. Y'all have a responsibility to yourselves to talk about what good sex is and what good sex isn't. You say what it is that you want in the bedroom. If the dude does not give what it is that you're asking for, then it is well within your right for you to be like, I can't do this anymore, or I'm not interested in pursuing this anymore. And you go and find someone that will probably give it to you a hell of a lot better. Now, I'm not saying that you should go and hoe around and shit, just looking for the best dick on the planet. But for the most part, like, this whole BS of most women have never experienced orgasm, this is garbage. Like, there's a ton of women out here that are experiencing orgasm, that have experienced orgasm multiple times from multiple different partners. So nowadays, most of what they're talking about is how a guy hasn't made her squirt, or this guy doesn't make me squirt, my ex did, or I was once with this guy and he was so amazing in bed I squirted like twice. Like, I feel like that's where the goalposters moved, because there's a ton of women that get orgasm. So I'd even argue that most women do actually achieve orgasm now more than ever. And with that said, I'm going to move things on to the next unpopular opinion of this episode, which is, and I quote, "Sex is a private act between two consenting adults and none of the government's business," end quote. Now, I will be very honest, and I believe that this is probably quite true, but there is a reason for it. Now, considering that sex is a private act, as long as you decide to actually keep it private between two consenting adults, if not more, because I know some of y'all are crazy out here, I do agree that it should be kept private and shouldn't really be the government's business. The only issue is, when it's this act, unfortunately, not all adults are consenting, and not all the people involved are adults in some cases. And as a result of that, involving the government for the sake of enforcing some level of law does make quite a bit of sense. Now, I do believe that there are some elements to it that I'm not the biggest fan of, like controlling things like abortion and, certain forms of family planning and shit. I would probably argue that those kind of hold sex itself back, but when you kind of think about it, the government has also kind of helped it a little bit. So the provision of free condoms in government institutions and parastatals and a couple other places is a particularly good thing. The promotion of good sexual health is also a particularly good thing. Now, I know the government doesn't really push it as much, but when you look at the initiatives that have been used to promote certain things like free pads for young girls, like, I know it's not directly sex related, but to some degree it does kind of affect it indirectly, which I believe is particularly positive. So while I do agree with it, I also see where the government kind of comes in and does actually do a particularly okay job. Now, with that said, let me move on to the next unpopular opinion, which says, and I quote, "Sex is not the problem, lust is. Sex was specifically created for man and woman to enjoy in their marital confines. But right now, everyone wants to have it with no strings attached, swingers just sleeping here and there, helter-skelter," end quote. Do I agree? I would argue yes, but at the same time, I would argue no. The part where I do actually agree is sex isn't the problem, lust is. Yes, sex is not a problem. Sex is actually a particularly good act. It is a great act. It is quite literally where you find the peak of human physical pleasure. That is one thing that is very unequivocal and quite true. So when I look at it, it is a particularly good act. The problem is when that act is not treated as well and it's not practiced in a particularly safe environment. So when you look at issues that come with lust, so, the spreading of diseases, when you look at people, using it as a tool for infidelity, or just basically engaging in infidelity because they want to have more sex, it can be quite the issue here. So yes, lust is the problem. But was it specifically created for man and woman to enjoy in their marital confines? I can get that's what you probably read in the Bible, but animals are doing it, but they're not married. So do the rules not apply to them? I don't know. Long and short of what I'm trying to say is sex has been happening even before marriage started happening. The Bible will talk about the first marriage, but when you look at, older history and the fact that marriages was something that were mainly for like nobles and wealthy people, you realize that people have been having sex and not in a married way for quite a while. I think it's just that Christianity has really made it seem as though marriage was the thing that used to come before sex most of the time. But, then again, it is an opinion. But with that said, considering that I'm basically getting to the end of this episode, let me, instead of using a conclusion, finish off with a bonus tip here, or at least a bonus unpopular opinion, which says, and I quote, Having sex with someone who knows what they are doing is an underrated skill. End quote. And this I just have to agree with. Like, it is actually quite true. Having sex with someone who knows what it is that they're doing is an underrated skill. The only thing is, I think sometimes people assume that someone who's had a lot of sex knows what they're doing, and people who know what they're doing will have a lot of sex. That's not always the case. And honestly speaking, one of the things that you notice when you start having sex, if you have sex with more than one person, is that different people like things differently. Like, everyone likes their sex a little bit different from everyone else. And it's not really about you being great in bed. Like, there are some instances where you might be considered great in bed, and there's other instances where you might just come off a bit lackluster. Not because you're bad, but because what it is that interests the other person is particularly different. So the best way to do it is to listen to each other and try to look at each other's desires and try to see how best you can fulfill them. If you're good at that, then yes, you will seem like someone that knows what it is that they are doing. Which is why people who have sex quite a bit together usually tend to have better sex over time, just because they understand each other a lot more and they cater to each other's needs a little bit more. That is if, both sides are catering to each other's needs. Although, then again, maybe I could be wrong about saying this, or maybe I could be right, but either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open on IG. It is at the Breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the Breaktime Podcast. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. And on Bluesky, it is at the breaktimepod.bsky.social. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end of this very long episode, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.